leaking top insider stock trades every day until they stop us. Remember, 90% of insider trades are totally useless. We're trying to only find those few trades that are unscheduled, abnormal in some way, that have a high signal of success. So looking for unscheduled trades, ignoring things like tax sales, which we'll see a huge tax sale today, dividend reinvestment, things like that. Anything that's abnormal about them, flipping from a buy to a sell or a sell to a buy, unusual timing. A history of success from that insider is one of the best signals if they tend to buy the stock before it pops. And then if multiple insiders are buying, that's also fantastic. And the momentum of the stock, or if they're buying the dip or selling the rip, can also be interesting. Looking at the number of insider purchases on the daily chart here, yesterday, we had a pretty big, Elon Musk came in with $1 billion purchase, and we had, quite a few buys, relatively speaking, to where we had been recently. We kind of dipped back down more to a normal range with the, back to 17% of the percent of total trades that were buys, which is below the median, but about where we've been for, the last 2 weeks or so. So, probably still a slightly more bullish start to the week so far, but overall, it's been a little bit bearish here recently, but nothing too alarming. Most of the insight, or most of the signal from insiders, is going to come when you get these huge spikes in terms of the percentage of buying over these longer time periods, especially over monthly and quarterly. This quarter, we're going to come in quite a bit below the average, which the median is 25% of all the trades being buys back to 2018. We're going to come in probably closer to 20%, so a little bit below that, but again, nothing too crazy. So let's head over and look at the insider trade. Let's start with the purchases here. We'll look at the bullish returns, the most recent date, purchases, and then we'll filter by transaction value, and let's see what we can find here. So we've got a couple of IPOs, so not really much we can do. This is part of the reason also why, the value of insider buys this week has been so high, is because of these, big buying at this BlackRock Coffee IPO and this LB Pharmaceuticals IPO. So not much we can do there. Camp Therapeutics, anytime, obviously, biotech has the biggest possibility really for like sketchy insider trades because of the huge catalyst that they have. Always interesting to pay attention to those. 10% owners buying, not normally the most interesting. And as you can see, historically, back when they IPO'd, they also bought a big chunk, and that was obviously terrible timing. So let's see. I don't know if anybody else was buying Camp Therapeutics. Who do we have here? Well, that could be a little more interesting. Let's see. Looks like, so they had an oversubscribed private placement. So that's what this looks like. Yeah. So it looks like this is all going to be part of a private placement, which definitely makes it less interesting because there's a decent chance these people are getting a pretty good deal on the stock here. So yeah, they're buying it for $1.53. The stock's trading $2.77. Again, always great work when you can buy a stock 50% off or whatever that would be. They're up 70% already, 80%. So not much for us to do, unfortunately. Now, next decade, this is a little bit of an interesting one now that we've seen, I believe, a couple days of insider buying. Yep, so this is the second day of insider buying. Pretty sizable too. You've got the CEO here buying $2 million. And now we've got a director increasing their holdings by 64%, which is pretty big. A $3.6 million purchase is pretty big. Not much history from either of these. It looks like if we just click into this director here, it's probably their first ever purchase, first ever trade, and first ever purchase. And then if we look at the CEO, same thing, first ever trade, first ever purchase. So that in and of itself is obviously we'd rather see the insiders have really good history of returns, but no returns is interesting in and of itself right there. Also, you will see over the last month down 30%. Why are they down 30%? Well, if you look, it looks like they just greenlit a new project at their, they're a liquefied natural gas developer. One of their buildings, or whatever you want to call it, that they're developing, that they refer to as Train 4, they got funding for, and it actually they got crushed afterwards because analysts started downgrading them, which we could see here. They got downgraded by a couple of analysts at TD Cowen and a couple other places, and basically the reason being Morgan Stanley also downgraded them was TD Cowen downgraded due to unfavorable financing conditions. The Morgan Stanley downgraded them, citing lower cash flow expectations than they had expected. And then the analysts at TD Cowen also mentioned that they believe the company's embedded spot margin assumptions are too high. So basically, they, for whatever reason, I don't know enough about the company to really have an opinion myself on what, whether or not their assumptions are too high for both cash flow and for the spot margin. This is also just an industry I don't know a ton about. However, I do think it's pretty clear here, if you're in the oil and gas industry, it's pretty clear this is worth taking a look at, because obviously the two insiders disagree with that assumption. It would seem. I don't think they'd be putting in, $2 million and $3 million is nothing to sneeze at, especially for a director who sometimes, the executive executives will put in little token amounts to try to show, just fake show confidence to the market. But like a director doesn't have to come in and drop $3.6 million. So I think that's notable as well. You also notice no real insider trading, very, very little historically. So if we were to look to, it looks like we've kind of flattened out. We had a few big days of drops after the downgrades, and then we've kind of flattened out a little bit here. So my hunch is that the huge dip due to the downgrade is probably over. Obviously, if more bad news comes out, it's going to continue dipping, but I think that dip at least has played out, which is also probably why the insiders are buying around these prices. So, not an industry I know enough about, but a very interesting purchase in my opinion. What else we have here? Somebody buying MicroStrategy is pretty interesting. She bought before one time, very poorly timed, but now buying again. The stock's down a little bit. Not much to really say about this. I don't think it's a high signal buy, really necessarily. But everybody knows about MicroStrategy and what's going on there. So another energy company here. Let's see. No new news really. They announced first quarter results. Nothing interesting there. The stock appears to be a little bit up on an uptrend. This dude's previous purchasing history is no good. So unless there's other people buying, which does not look to be the case, there's not much for us to do there. Here we have another one. So this says dividend reinvestment. So we just want to verify that. So sometimes this will happen where the shares were acquired. It includes shares acquired under the dividend reinvestment plan, which if you go look at the filing itself, that means it's going to be over here. So it's just telling you for whatever, I don't know why they do this. It's very annoying. It's telling you for whatever reason that some of the shares that this guy owns were acquired through a dividend reinvestment plan, but not these shares that he purchased. So he's purchasing shares not under a dividend reinvestment plan. Then that, makes it interesting enough. This is another one where, no real news recently, but we do have a handful of insiders buying here all at around the same prices, just below $10. So that's interesting. Multiple insider buys. Certainly more interesting. If we look at just Adam Weinstein, looks like he might have a pretty good history of purchasing. So he's purchased quite a few times before. Let's go see how well he's timed those. I mean, nailed this purchase back here, obviously, in the short dip there at the end of 2024. Overall, I mean, the stock doesn't move a ton. It's a very high dividend stock. So, it's more of like an income play. I wouldn't expect this stock to like double anytime soon. Tried to buy the dip a little bit here during March. So just kind of over the long term, he's maybe timed it okay. But I wouldn't call these the greatest. I wouldn't call him the greatest timer ever. Though, I mean, 30% on a stock that doesn't move too much, over the 1 year averages, and he does kind of tend to nail all the dips, is notable. Not my preferred type of company to invest in. That's for sure. These like 12, it's yielding like 12% or something crazy. I guess we can just go look. Dividend yields somewhere in here. So 13% it looks like. And so with these companies, it always just comes down to, it's always going to come down to whether or not they can maintain their dividend. Their earnings are trending downward and its net investment coverage was barely at 100%. So people are basically worried they're going to have to cut dividends. This would be a pretty good example of one where I would be slightly concerned about insiders just trying to show like, hey, no, we're actually not going to cut our dividend. Here's some like tiny purchases. In this case, the purchases are actually decent size, and you have a few different insiders buying, and this guy has a good enough history that, maybe not the case. With like this one, $7,000 doesn't really mean anything. Let's see who's this guy here. A director. So again, a director has less incentive to need to make these purchases. If it's like the CEO buying like $10,000, or $100,000, I'd be more questioning of it. But to me, if you're into big income plays and you want to potentially buy a stock with 13% dividend that, might recover a tiny bit, you can join Adam Weinstein here in buying the dip. But the whole concern, as we mentioned, is going to be about the dividend. Anything else interesting here as I go down the list? Not too much that stands out. One, we have, I do like this company. They're a crypto treasury company that I actually own a little bit of just as part of, I have a basket of these crypto treasury stocks that haven't yet popped. As you can see, it's just kind of a dead company, as most crypto treasuries are, and they are desperately trying to pump the price. There's this shareholder letter from a couple of days ago or from like a week ago where the CEO is just talking about BitSensor and AI and how BitSensor is going to change the world and how basically they're buying Tau is their choice of the crypto treasury and why that's such a great idea and blah, blah, blah. It's like one of the most promotional press releases you're going to read. So my kind of bet here would be they're going to just continue attempting to pump this stock over and over again until it works. For me, it's a high risk play. You're probably just going to continue to bleed money until, if you get lucky and the stock does pump. But I do think insiders buying is bullish, especially in this kind of like crypto treasury companies are just already sketchy and scammy. So insiders buying stock in those kind of companies is, kind of par for the course. And I think, as part of a basket, like I said, of some of these crypto treasury plays, just to try to catch, a huge pop could be something that's interesting to you. But do note, high risk, probably going to just lose all your money in most of it. Let's switch over to the sales now. We got Vlad here at Robinhood, but it's just tax sales. So $400 million in sales, but all of it is to cover. He had represents a mandatory sale of sufficient number of shares to cover the tax holding liability and the vesting and settlement of almost 7 million PSUs, performance shares. So basically, he got a bunch of performance shares because the stock performed so well. Because he exercised those, he then had to pay a bunch of tax. So he had to sell a bunch. I wish I had a $400 million tax bill, but alas. Here we've got some typically at the top here, it's going to be mostly 10% owners who are just lower signal in general. They're just big funds that are, who knows why they may be buying or selling. If they have really good history, like, General Atlantic Healthcare, you might say, okay, they do time things pretty well here, as you can see. And the healthcare provider, as we've mentioned a few times, I'm actually working on some data that'll hopefully, be able to be useful for this. But the healthcare industry has had a very interesting mix of buyers and sellers. And I think that'd be a really interesting place if you're interested in healthcare stocks to go just compare the companies where a bunch of buying is happening. You saw at United Healthcare, you saw at Eli Lilly, and then you can compare to some companies, or you've got Paulson was buying Bosch. So you've got all these, there's a nice dichotomy between some insiders buying stock, some insiders selling stock. Hims was another one that's just been getting hammered with bad news, and all the insiders are dumping the stock. So, it'd be an interesting place to look to buy maybe the stocks that people are the insiders are buying, and avoid the ones that the insiders are selling. Some more just 10% owner stuff. Jensen Huang on a 10b5-1 plan. He's been on this for a while. I do think it's notable that insiders have been selling quite a bit of the stock, though, and not just Jensen. Jensen's on a 10b5-1 plan, but they actually have quite a few insiders not on 10b5-1 plans selling the stock, which is kind of weird. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. And then obviously today they had the bad news coming out of China. There's a chance, you never want to try to time the top of any of these, but there's a chance we're looking at, near the end of the NVIDIA bull run here. We've got some employee stock purchase programs, some 10b5-1 stuff, not super interesting. Well, the employee stock purchase actually is just going to be probably the same as before, where it's just going to tell you, same as the dividend reinvestment, it's probably just, I bet it's number 3, acquired under the employee stock purchase plan. It's just telling you he owns stock under that. But 10b5-1 sale, he's been selling for a little while, not that interesting. This one a little more interesting. The CEO at Motorola continuing to sell the stock here. Historically speaking, timing's, I guess as you go back further, timing's not very good. So I guess maybe no longer as interesting. The only thing that could moderately make this an interesting sale is if it's either his largest sale ever and or a bunch of other insiders also are buying this or selling the stock, which, let's see, is this his largest sale? It is not super interesting, I don't think, actually. EchoStar, had some news. I don't remember if it was merger, like some product. I think it was more of a product partnership contract situation, but insiders have now been dumping the stock ever since that pop. So yeah, the stock's up 200% in the last 3 months, and now you've got all these insiders just trying to get out, selling a large portion of the stock being sold, insiders getting out. I don't know if there's a ton of insight that we can really glean from that, but just insiders taking their cash. Figures this is just them selling after the IPO, though pretty early into the IPO, which is kind of weird. Vistra, this is one where we've seen insiders selling pretty regularly, actually. Another one where, you might be worth looking at some other companies in the same sector if you're interested in this space. But I think that's all for today. You can head over to CEOWatcher.com to find all the top insider trades, and don't forget to like and subscribe.